They called her the behemoth of Blackwood. They said no man could ever love a woman the size of a mountain, let alone save her. They were wrong. In the winter of 1889, Beatrice Brown didn't just run from a cruel husband. She ran straight into the legend of the Bitterroot Peaks. What happened up in that cabin wasn't just a romance. It was a war for survival. When the most dangerous man in the territory came to kill her, he found out that the beast on the mountain wasn't the bears or the wolves. It was the man who loved her. This is the true story of how a runaway saved a legend and how a legend saved her. The year was 1889, and the Montana Territory was unforgiving, but not nearly as unforgiving as the parlor of the Brown estate. Beatrice Brown sat on the edge of the velvet settee, the wood groaning slightly under her weight. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles white, staring at the floorboards. Across the room, her husband, Reginald Brown, the silver baron of Blackwood, paced back and forth, holding a glass of amber whiskey. "It is a simple matter of logistics, Beatrice," Reginald sneered, his voice smooth as oil but sharp as a razor. He stopped and looked at her, his eyes scanning her large frame with undisguised disgust. "The town council is hosting the governor next week. I cannot have you looming over the festivities. You take up too much space. You take up too much air." Beatrice flinched. She was used to the insults. She had been a lawman all her life, inheriting her father's heavy build and slow metabolism. Her father, a cattle rancher named Big Jim Miller, had loved her fiercely. But Big Jim was dead, and his vast fortune was now in the hands of Reginald, the man who had charmed his way into her life only to turn it into a prison the moment the wedding ring slid onto her finger. "I can stay in my room, Reginald," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't come down." "Oh, you certainly won't," Reginald laughed, a cold, hollow sound, "because you won't be here." He walked over to the fireplace and threw a log onto the flames. The sparks flew up, illuminating the cruel set of his jaw. "I've arranged for you to visit the sanatorium in the valley. They have treatments for women of your grotesque proportions. You leave tonight, in the storm. It's better if no one sees you leave." Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what the sanatorium was. It wasn't a hospital. It was a dumping ground where wealthy men sent the wives they grew tired of. Women went in, but they never came out. "Reginald, please," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "It's snowing. The pass is dangerous." "The carriage is waiting," he said, turning his back on her. "Do not make me call the guards to drag you." Beatrice stood up, her heavy silk dress rustling. She walked to the door, pausing to look back at the man she had once thought loved her. She saw him pour a small vial of clear liquid into his whiskey, the same liquid she had seen him put in her father's soup the week before he died. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't sending her to the sanatorium to lose weight. He was sending her there to die, or perhaps the carriage was never meant to make it there at all. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take her jewelry. She grabbed a heavy wool cloak from the hallway stand, shoved her feet into her sturdy leather boots, and ran. She didn't run to the carriage waiting out front. She ran out the kitchen door into the biting cold of the Montana night. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, blinding and relentless. Beatrice was a big woman, breathing hard as she pushed through the drifts, but she had the strength of a rancher's daughter. She scrambled toward the stables, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't take a horse. Reginald would hear the hooves. She had to go on foot. She had to disappear. She headed for the tree line, toward the looming shadows of the Bitterroot Mountains. The townsfolk said the mountains were haunted. They said a madman lived up there, a ghost who shot trespassers on sight. They called him the Butcher of the Ridge. Beatrice didn't care. The monster on the mountain might kill her, but the monster in her house surely would. She climbed for hours. Her legs burned. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. The expensive silk of her dress tore on briars. The seeped into her bones. She slipped on a patch of ice, tumbling down a rocky incline, her head striking a stone with a sickening crack. The world spun. Darkness encroached at the edges of her vision. She lay in the snow, the flakes covering her large form like a white shroud. "This is it," she thought, her consciousness fading. "I'm just a mound of snow now. No one will even find me until spring." The last thing she heard was the crunch of heavy boots on snow and a low, growling voice that didn't sound like it belonged to a man, but to the mountain itself. What in the hell? Silas Kincaid did not like surprises. He liked the silence of the pines, the sharp crack of his rifle, and the solitude that kept the memories of the war at bay. He was a man built of granite and scar tissue, 6'4" of hardened muscle, with a beard that hid half his face and eyes that had seen too much blood. He had been checking his trap lines when he saw the dark shape in the snow. At first, he thought it was a bear, fallen early into hibernation or wounded by a trap. He raised his Winchester, his finger tightening on the trigger. But bears didn't wear blue silk. He lowered the rifle and approached cautiously. The snow was coming down harder now, a blizzard in full swing. He knelt beside the shape and brushed the snow away from the face. He paused. It was a woman, a large woman. Her face was pale as milk, her lips blue, a gash bleeding freely on her forehead. "You're a long way from the tea parties, darlin'," Silas muttered. He checked for a pulse. It was faint, thready. She was freezing to death. Silas looked up at the ridge. His cabin was another mile up. Carrying a buck was one thing. Carrying a full-grown woman of her size in deep snow was another. He didn't hesitate. He wasn't a hero. He'd left that title in the mud of a battlefield 10 years ago. But he wasn't a monster, despite what the town of Blackwood said about him. He slid his arms under her. She was heavy, solid. A woman of substance, his grandfather would have said. Silas grunted, bracing his legs, and lifted her. The weight strained his back, his boots sinking deep into the powder, but he found a rhythm. Step, breathe. Step, breathe. "Don't you die on me," he growled into the wind. "I ain't digging a grave in frozen ground." The journey back to the cabin was brutal. The wind howled like a banshee, trying to push him off the narrow trail. By the time he kicked open the heavy oak door of his cabin, his muscles were screaming and his lungs were burning. He laid her on the fur rug in front of the massive stone hearth. The cabin was sparse, filled with the scent of pine pitch and curing leather. He quickly built up the fire until it roared, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. He had to get her warm. Wet clothes meant death. Silas hesitated for only a second. Modesty was a luxury for the living. She was halfway to being a corpse. With efficient, clinical hands, he cut away the ruined silk dress and the sodden layers beneath, leaving her in her chemise. He grabbed his thickest wool blankets and wrapped her tight, cocooning her against the heat of the fire. He boiled water, cleaned the wound on her head, and stitched it up with the steady hands of a man who had sewn up his own leg more than once. For 3 days, the storm raged outside, sealing them in. For 3 days, Beatrice drifted in and out of a fever. She mumbled names Silas didn't know. Reginald, the poison, don't let him. Silas sat in his rocking chair, whittling a piece of cedar, watching her. He'd seen plenty of starving, waif-like women in the towns, cinched so tight in corsets they looked like they'd snap in a strong wind. This woman was different. Even in her sickness, there was a softness to her, a grandeur. The firelight played on her pale skin. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Beatrice woke with a gasp. The first thing she felt was heat. The second was the smell of coffee. She sat up, clutching the rough wool blanket to her chest. She wasn't in her room. She wasn't in the sanatorium. She was in a cabin that looked like it had been carved out of the mountain itself. And there was a man watching her. He stood by the stove, a giant in a flannel shirt, his back to her. He turned slowly, holding a tin cup. His face was rugged, scarred, and bearded, his eyes dark and unreadable. Beatrice shrank back, shame flooding her instantly. She knew what she looked like, a whale beached on his floor. Messy hair, bruised face, taking up all his space. I'm sorry, she stammered, her voice raspy. I'll leave. I didn't mean to burden you. Silas walked over, his boots thumping on the floorboards. He held out the cup. Drink. It's chicory and coffee. Bitter, but hot. Beatrice took the cup, her hands shaking. Who are you? Silas, he said simply. You took a nasty fall. I'm heavy, she blurted out. It was always the elephant in the room, so she preferred to point it out before they could mock her. You must have struggled to bring me here. I'm sorry, I'm so fat. Silas looked at her, his head tilting slightly. He didn't laugh. He didn't sneer. He looked at her with a confusing intensity. "You're alive," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That's the only weight that matters. And for the record, I carried a dead elk up this ridge last week." "You smell better than the elk." Beatrice blinked, stunned. You aren't going to send me back?" Silas turned back to the stove to stir a pot of stew. Rods blocked. Snow's 10 feet deep in the pass. You ain't going nowhere, and nobody is coming up here. You're stuck with the butcher of the ridge, ma'am. Beatrice looked at his back. She should be terrified. She was trapped in a cabin with a man rumored to be a killer. But as she took a sip of the hot coffee, she realized something. For the first time in years, she wasn't cold. "I'm Beatrice," she said softly. "Eat up, Beatrice," Silas said, ladling stew into a wooden bowl. "You'll need your strength. The mountain don't care about your manners, but it demands your muscle." As she ate, ravenous, she caught him glancing at her again. It wasn't the look of disgust Reginald gave her. It was curiosity or something else. Silas watched her eat. He noticed the way her hands moved, delicate despite her size. He noticed the curve of her jaw. He'd spent 10 years convincing himself he didn't need people. He didn't need softness. But as the snow piled up against the window, sealing them into their own private world, Silas Kincaid had a sinking feeling that the quiet life he'd built was about to be shattered. And looking at the woman with the eyes of a hunted deer, he wasn't sure he minded. The trouble was, the snow would eventually melt, and whoever she was running from, the Reginald she mumbled about, would come looking. Silas touched the handle of the Bowie knife at his belt. Let him come, he thought. Let him try. The snow did not stop for 2 weeks. The cabin became a world unto itself, suspended in a white void, disconnected from time and the cruelties of Blackwood society. For the first few days, Beatrice moved like a ghost, apologizing for every floorboard that creaked under her step. She tried to make herself small, hunching her shoulders, sitting in the darkest corners. She waited for the insults. She waited for Silas to tell her she was eating too much, or taking up too much room, or that she was unsightly to look at. But the insults never came. Silas was a man of few words, but his actions spoke with a loudness that startled her. When she sat by the fire, he didn't move away. He simply added another log. When she ate the stew he made, hearty, rich venison broth, he didn't watch her with judgment. He nodded with satisfaction when she finished the bowl. "You eat like a bird for a woman of your build," Silas grunted one evening, whittling a new handle for his axe. "Starving yourself won't make the winter go faster." Beatrice flushed, looking down at her hands. "Reginald, my husband, he didn't like me to eat in public. He said it was unseemly for a creature of my size." Silas stopped whittling, the knife stilled in his hand. He looked up, his dark eyes narrowing. "Your husband sounds like a man who's never had to survive a hard day in his life. Up here, fat is fuel. Muscle is life." "You're built to last, Beatrice. He's built to break." It was the first compliment she had received in 10 years. It wasn't about her being pretty. It was about her being useful, being alive. Second week, Beatrice's strength began to return. The rancher's daughter in her, long buried under layers of silk and shame, began to wake up. She couldn't sit idle any longer. One morning, while Silas was out checking the perimeter, Beatrice looked around the cabin. It was a bachelor's mess. Dusty, disorganized, functional but chaotic. She found a bucket of water and a rag. She started scrubbing. She organized the tins of food. She mended the tear in Silas's spare coat using a bone needle she found on the mantel. When Silas returned, stomping snow off his boots, he stopped dead in the doorway. The cabin smelled of pine sap and cleanliness. The floor was swept. His coat was folded neatly on the table, the rip gone. He looked at Beatrice. She was standing by the stove, her face flushed from exertion, sweat curling the stray hairs on her neck. She looked terrified, expecting him to be angry that she had touched his things. Silas walked over to the table and picked up the coat. He ran his thumb over the stitching. It was tight, professional work. "My mother taught me to sew," she whispered. "Before she died." Silas put the coat down. "You got good hands, Beatrice. Strong hands." He looked her in the eye. "I ain't used to coming home to order. I have to earn my keep," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "I won't be a burden." "You ain't a burden," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. Your company, there's a difference. The dynamic shifted. They fell into a rhythm. Silas taught her how to bank the fire so it would last all night. He showed her how to clean his Winchester rifle, placing the heavy weapon in her hands. It kicks like a mule, he warned, standing close behind her to correct her stance. Lean into it. Put your weight behind it. Use what you got. Beatrice held the rifle, feeling the cold steel. For the first time, her weight wasn't an enemy. It was an anchor. When she fired at the target, a dead tree stump 50 yards away, the recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she didn't stumble. She absorbed it. The bullet took a chunk out of the bark. Damn fine shot, Silas murmured, close to her ear. Beatrice turned to look at him, adrenaline coursing through her. She was breathless, her eyes wide. Silas was looking down at her, and the air between them suddenly felt thinner, hotter than the fire inside. He reached out, his rough hand brushing a snowflake from her hair. His fingers lingered on her cheek. Beatrice froze. Reginald had never touched her face unless it was to grip her chin and force her to look at him while he berated her. Silas's touch was reverent, like he was touching something rare. Why? She breathed. Why are you helping me? Look at me. I am looking, Silas said. I see a woman who walked up a mountain in a blizzard. I see a woman who can shoot a Winchester and stitch a coat. The valley is full of painted dolls, Beatrice. Porcelain cracks. You're made of iron. He pulled his hand back, as if burned, and turned away quickly. Storm's breaking. I need to check the trap line at the ridge. He left her standing in the snow, her heart pounding a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. Spring came not with a whisper, but with a roar. The ice on the creek cracked, sounding like gunshots in the night. The snow retreated, revealing the brown, wet earth beneath. With the thaw came the danger. Beatrice had been on the mountain for 3 months. She had changed. The corset-pinched waist was gone, replaced by the natural, solid curve of her body beneath one of Silas's flannel shirts she had altered. Her skin was no longer pasty. It was kissed by the wind and sun. She moved with confidence, chopping wood alongside Silas, her arms growing firm. But the melting snow meant the pass was open. One afternoon, Silas went down the mountain to the trading post at the crossroads, miles below the cabin but far enough from Blackwood to be safe. Or so he thought. He told Beatrice to stay inside, to keep the door barred. He was gone for hours. When he returned, the sun was setting, casting the mountains in blood-red light. Beatrice heard his horse, Buster, whinny in distress. She unbarred the door. Silas practically fell out of the saddle. He wasn't wounded, but his face was a mask of fury. In his hand, he crumpled a thick paper. Silas? Beatrice rushed to him, grabbing the reins. What happened? He didn't answer. He marched into the cabin, grabbed the whiskey bottle, and took a long pull. Then he slammed the crumpled paper onto the table. Look, he snarled. Beatrice smoothed out the paper. It was a wanted poster. Wanted. Deed O.R. alive. Beatrice Brown. Escaped lunatic. Murderous. Reward. $5,000 Gayaldi. Below the bold text was a sketch of her. It was a caricature, exaggerating her size, making her look like a monster with wild eyes. Murderous? Beatrice gasped, her hands trembling. I never! Reginald is alive! I saw him! Read the fine print, Silas said, his voice like grinding stones. Wanted for the attempted murder of her husband, Reginald Brown, and the theft of family heirlooms. Subject is dangerous, deranged, and of immense proportions. Approach with extreme caution. He's twisting it, Beatrice cried, tears of frustration hot in her eyes. He's projecting his own crimes onto me. He tried to poison me, and now he's paying $5,000. Silas, that's a fortune. That's more money than anyone in this territory has ever seen. She looked at Silas. $5,000 could buy a new life. It could buy a ranch. It could buy peace. You have to turn me in, she whispered, the words tasting lash. Silas looked at her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. What? He'll kill you if he finds me here, Beatrice said, backing away. Or the bounty hunters will. You're the butcher of the ridge, but even you can't fight an army of greedy men. Turn me in. Take the money. Please. Silas crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her shoulders, not roughly, but with an intensity that stopped her breath. You think I want his blood money? Silas hissed. You think I saved you from the snow just to sell you back to the devil? I am trying to save you, Beatrice yelled back, her voice cracking. Look at me, Silas. I am a liability. I am a 300-pound target on your back. I am nothing but trouble. Stop it, Silas roared. The cabin went silent. The fire popped. Silas's grip on her shoulders softened, his thumbs tracing the line of her collarbone through the flannel. His eyes searched hers, stripping away the defenses she had built for 30 years. You listen to me, and you listen good, Silas said, his voice trembling with a raw emotion he could no longer suppress. I have lived on this mountain for 10 years. I have lived with ghosts and silence. I thought that was all I deserved. He stepped closer, his body heat radiating against hers. He had to look up slightly to meet her eyes, and he didn't care. Then you fell into my snow, and for 3 months, this cabin has been a home. You ain't a target, Beatrice, and you sure as hell ain't a monster. He took a breath, his voice dropping to a whisper that shook the foundation of her world. You're the most beautiful thing on this mountain. The sunrise don't compare. The elk don't compare. You are real. You are warm. And if you think I'm going to let some powdered dandy from the valley touch a hair on your head, you really are crazy. Beatrice stared at him, tears spilling over her cheeks. Silas, I don't want the gold, he said, leaning his forehead against hers. I want you. I want us. Here. The confession hung in the air, heavy and sweet. Beatrice let out a sob, her resolve shattering. She wrapped her arms around his broad back, pulling him into her. He felt solid, safe. He's coming, she whispered into his neck. Reginald won't stop. Let him come. Silas pulled back, his eyes hard again, the soldier returning. He thinks he's hunting a fat, helpless woman and a hermit. He don't know he's walking into a wolf's den. Silas walked to the wall and pulled down a second rifle, a heavy-bore buffalo gun. He tossed it onto the table next to the wanted poster. Can you ride? He asked. I haven't ridden since I was a girl. No horse could carry me comfortably, she admitted. We ain't using horses for running, Silas said grimly. We're using the terrain. This is my mountain. He has money, hired guns, and lies. We have the high ground, and we have the truth, he turned to her. But I need to know, Beatrice. If we do, there's no going back. We fight. We might die. Are you with me? Beatrice looked at the caricature on the poster. The monster Reginald wanted the world to see. Then she looked at her reflection in the darkened window, the woman Silas saw. She reached out and picked up the Winchester he had taught her to use. She checked the chamber. It was loaded. I'm not running anymore, Silas, she said, her voice steady. Let's teach them a lesson. Silas grinned, a feral, dangerous smile that made him look every bit the Legend of the Butcher. Atta girl. Now, let's get to work. We've got some traps to set. But down in the valley, the rumble of carriage wheels and the clatter of 20 armed men on horseback signaled the approach of the storm. Reginald Brown wasn't just coming for his wife. He was coming to erase the only witness to his crimes, and he had brought the one man Silas feared from his past, a tracker named One-Eye McCoy. The war for the mountain had begun. The mountain held its breath. The birds had gone silent, and the wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness that amplified every snap of a twig and crunch of gravel. For 2 days, Silas and Beatrice had turned the area surrounding the cabin into a kill box. Silas moved with the grim efficiency of a man who had defended positions against armies before. He strung tripwires made of blackened fishing line across the narrow choke points of the trail. He dug punji pits, holes filled with sharpened stakes, and covered them with pine boughs and fresh snow. Beatrice worked until her hands were blistered and raw. She hauled rocks to the edge of the overhangs, creating rock slides ready to be triggered with a single push. She filled empty whiskey bottles with kerosene and rags, creating makeshift incendiaries. You got a good arm? Silas asked, watching her stack the Molotov cocktails. I used to toss hay bales for my father when the hands were short, Beatrice said, wiping soot from her forehead. I can throw. Good, Silas nodded, because when they come, they'll come heavy. They came at dawn on the 3rd day. It started with the sound of a horse snorting down the ridge. Then, the glint of sunlight on metal. Through the scope of his Winchester, Silas counted them. 18, 20, Silas whispered. Reginald brought a posse. He bought the sheriff, Beatrice said, peering through the slats of the boarded-up window. I see Sheriff Miller down there. And, oh God, she gripped the sill. Riding next to Reginald, on a massive black stallion, was a man with a patch over his left eye and a long duster coat. "Who is it?" Silas asked, sensing her fear. "That's McCoy," she whispered. "One-Eye McCoy. My father used to hire him to track wolves that killed the cattle. He never misses, Silas. He never gives up." Silas's jaw tightened. "I know McCoy. He's a bad man to have an enemy of." Suddenly, a voice boomed up from the valley floor. Reginald Brown sat on his horse, looking out of place in his fine city coat, holding a megaphone. "Beatrice!" His voice echoed off the canyon walls, distorted and metallic. "I know you are up there! Come down now, and we can be civilized about this! I have a doctor here! Beatrice! We just want to help you!" Beatrice stayed silent, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You're sick, Beatrice," Reginald continued, his voice dripping with faux concern that twisted into mockery. "You've been seduced by this wild animal, this hermit. Come down before you get hurt. Think of your dignity, my dear. You don't belong on a mountain. You belong in a cage where you can't hurt yourself." Silas looked at Beatrice. "You want to answer him?" Beatrice took a deep breath. She picked up the Winchester. She didn't aim for Reginald. He was too far, and she wasn't a killer yet. She aimed for the rock face 10 feet above his head. Crack. The shot rang out, sharp and clear. The bullet struck the granite, sending a shower of stone splinters raining down on Reginald and his horse. The stallion reared, nearly throwing the Silver Baron into the mud. "There's your answer," Silas grinned. Down below, the pretense dropped. Reginald screamed, his face turning purple. "Kill them! Burn them out! 5,000 for the head of the man, and 1,000 extra for the fat sow!" The men dismounted, spreading out into the trees. The siege had begun. The first wave hit the tripwires within minutes. Explosions of black powder, buried in canisters, sent dirt and snow geysering into the air. Screams of men and horses shattered the peace of the wilderness. Silas was a phantom. He moved from window to window, firing, levering the action, and firing again. Every shot found a mark, a shoulder, a leg, a rifle stock. He wasn't shooting to kill instantly. He was shooting to slow them down, to create chaos. "Watch the flank!" Silas barked. Beatrice was at the rear window. She saw 3 men trying to scramble up the rocky incline behind the cabin. They were struggling for footing. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the first kerosene bottle, lit the rag with a match, and hurled it with all the strength of a woman who had carried the weight of the world for years. The bottle sailed through the air, an arc of fire against the gray sky. It smashed against the rocks right above the climbers, raining liquid fire down on them. They yelled, losing their grip and tumbling back down the slope. "Nice throw," Silas shouted, reloading. But there were too many of them, and McCoy was smart. While the hired guns rushed the front, drawing Silas's fire, McCoy had circled wide. He had climbed the ridge above the cabin, a feat Silas hadn't thought possible in this weather. Beatrice heard the thud on the roof. "Silas! Above us!" Before Silas could react, the chimney exploded. McCoy had dropped a bundle of dynamite down the flue. The blast blew the cast iron door off its hinges, filling the room with smoke and shrapnel. Silas was thrown backward, slamming into the wall. He crumpled, blood pouring from a gash in his temple. "Silas!" Beatrice screamed. She scrambled over the debris to him. He was dazed, blinking, trying to lift his rifle. "Roof!" he groaned. "Get out." The roof was on fire. Burning shingles began to fall into the main room. The smoke was thick, choking. Outside, the gunfire intensified as the men realized the cabin was breached. "We can't stay here!" Beatrice coughed. She grabbed Silas by his vest. "Get up! Leave me!" Silas rasped, blood in his teeth. "I'm done! Run out the back! Hide in the caves! No!" Beatrice roared. The sound came from deep within her, a primal rejection of loss. "I am not leaving you." She didn't ask for permission. She didn't think about physics. Beatrice Brown, the woman mocked for her size, bent down. She grabbed Silas Kincaid, 220 pounds of dead weight, and heaved. She didn't just drag him. She lifted him. Her knees buckled for a second under the combined weight, but she locked them. She felt the muscles in her back scream, felt the strain in her legs, but she stood. She was a mountain carrying a mountain. She kicked the back door open. The heat was blistering. She stumbled out into the cold air, carrying Silas over her shoulder, a sack of grain. Bullets zipped past them, kicking up snow. "There she is!" someone shouted. "The behemoth!" Beatrice didn't look back. She ran. She ran toward the narrow canyon trail that led to the upper peaks, a path too narrow for horses, too steep for most men. She ran until her lungs burned, until the roar of the fire faded behind her, replaced by the sound of boots pounding in pursuit. She reached a small plateau, a dead end surrounded by sheer drops on three sides. There was nowhere left to go. She gently lowered Silas behind a large boulder. He was conscious now, but weak, his vision swimming. "Beatrice," he whispered, reaching for her hand. You carried me." "I told you," she panted, checking the Winchester she had slung over her shoulder. She only had 2 bullets left. "I'm built to last." She stood up and turned to face the trail. Reginald Brown emerged from the trees, followed by One-Eye McCoy and 3 other winded gunmen. Reginald looked disheveled. His coat was torn, his face scratched, but he was smiling. "End of the line, darling," Reginald sneered, stepping forward. "Nowhere left to run, and no giant house to hide in." McCoy leveled his rifle at Beatrice, but he didn't fire. He looked at her, standing tall, chest heaving, blood on her face, protecting the wounded man behind her, and lowered his weapon slightly. There was a flicker of respect in his one good eye. "Shoot her, McCoy!" Reginald commanded. "She ain't armed, Mr. Brown," McCoy grunted. "And she just carried a man up a goat trail. I ain't shooting a woman in cold blood." "Then I'll do it myself!" Reginald screamed. He pulled a silver-plated revolver from his holster. Beatrice didn't flinch. She looked at her husband, really looked at him for the first time. He wasn't a baron. He wasn't a master. He was a small, petty man with a gun. "You won't shoot me, Reginald," she said, her voice steady and loud, carrying over the wind. "And why is that?" Reginald laughed nervously, aiming the gun at her chest. "Because you need my signature," she said. "I know about the trust, Reginald." Daddy locked it up. "You only get the money if I die after I sign over the rights to the Blackwood mining shares. If I die before that, the money goes to the state. You're broke, aren't you?" Reginald's face went pale. The truth hung in the air. The hired guns looked at each other. They realized they probably weren't getting paid. "Smart girl," Reginald hissed. He holstered the gun and pulled out a knife. "Fine, you'll sign. Then I'll cut your throat and throw you off this ledge. I'll tell the sheriff you slipped." He lunged at her. Reginald expected her to cower. He expected the slow, clumsy woman he had tormented for years. He didn't expect the woman who had spent a winter chopping wood, hauling water, and wrestling with survival. He stepped into the attack. When Reginald slashed with the knife, she caught his wrist. Her grip was iron. The strength she had hated, the man hands he had mocked, clamped down on his wrist with crushing force. Reginald's eyes went wide. "Let go! I am not a thing, Reginald!" Beatrice shouted. "I am not a mountain to be conquered. I am the storm!" She twisted his wrist. There was a sickening snap. Reginald screamed, dropping the knife. But he was desperate. He clawed at her eyes, kicking at her legs. He was fast, fueled by panic. He managed to get a hand around her throat, squeezing, trying to push her backward toward the cliff edge. "Die, you cow! Die!" he shrieked. He pushed her. Beatrice stumbled back, her boots slipping on the loose gravel near the edge. The drop was 300 feet. Reginald grinned, thinking he had won. He pushed harder. But he had forgotten the one thing he always hated about her: her mass. Beatrice planted her back foot. She stopped moving. She became immovable. She looked at Reginald, who was pushing with all his might against her solid frame, and she smiled. "You wanted all of me?" she whispered. "Here I am." Beatrice threw her weight forward. She didn't push with her hands. She slammed her entire body into him. It was like being hit by a carriage. Reginald flew backward. The air left his lungs in a whoosh. He stumbled, his boots scrabbling for purchase on the slick rock. He teetered on the edge, his arms windmilling. "Beatrice, help me!" he screamed, his eyes bulging with terror. Beatrice stood there, breathing hard. She looked at his hand reaching out. "I can't," she said softly. "I'm too heavy. I might pull you down." Reginald's foot slipped. He fell silently, vanishing into the mist of the canyon below. A few seconds later, there was a distant thud. Silence returned to the mountain. Beatrice turned around. The 3 hired guns were gone. They had seen enough and weren't getting paid. Only One-Eye McCoy remained. He stared at Beatrice, then at the edge where Reginald had disappeared. He tipped his hat. He slipped, McCoy said gruffly. That's what I saw. Tragically slipped while trying to rescue his wife. McCoy turned his horse and rode away down the trail. Beatrice's legs finally gave out. She sank to the ground. Beatrice! She turned. Silas was pulling himself up on the boulder. His face was bloody, half of his beard singed, but he was alive. She crawled to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. They held each other in the snow, surrounded by the ruins of their battle, breathing in the cold, clean air of freedom. You did it, Silas whispered into her hair. You saved us. We saved us, she corrected him. Beatrice looked down at her hands, bruised, dirty, and strong. She looked at the horizon, where the sun was finally breaking through the clouds. She was no longer the runaway wife. She was the survivor. She was the mountain. And for the first time in her life, she felt light as a feather. The adrenaline faded, but the reality of their situation set in quickly. Reginald was dead, but he was a powerful man, and his disappearance would not go unnoticed. Beatrice knew they couldn't hide on the ridge forever. If they wanted a life, a real life, they had to face the world below. 2 days after the siege, Beatrice and Silas rode down the mountain. They didn't sneak in the back way. They rode right down Main Street in Blackwood. Beatrice sat tall on Buster, the horse Reginald had ridden up, while Silas rode a mule they kept for hauling. They rode straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller was sitting at his desk, nursing a bruised ego and a bandaged arm from the rock slide. When the door opened and the behemoth walked in, followed by the butcher, the room went deadly silent. I'm here to make a statement, Beatrice said, her voice ringing off the walls. She slammed a heavy ledger onto the sheriff's desk. What is this? Miller stammered. Reginald's private accounts, she said. I found them in his saddlebags. Proof that he was embezzling from the town council. Proof he poisoned my father. And proof he hired you to look the other way. The sheriff turned pale. You can arrest us, Silas rumbled, stepping up beside her, looking more like a cleaned-up gentleman than a wild man, though the scar on his temple was fresh. But then that ledger goes to Governor. Or you can listen to the truth. The trial that followed was the talk of the territory for decades. It wasn't a trial in a courtroom, but a trial of public opinion. Beatrice took the stand in the town hall. She didn't wear a veil. She didn't wear a corset. She wore a simple dress she had made herself, and she told her story. She spoke of the abuse, the sanatorium, the poison. She spoke of the mountain. And then One-Eye McCoy walked in. The crowd gasped. McCoy was a mercenary. He didn't do moral support. I saw it, McCoy told the gathered crowd, leaning against the back wall. Reginald Brown slipped. He was trying to push her. She just stood her ground. That ain't murder. That's gravity. With McCoy's testimony and the damning evidence in the ledger, the town of Blackwood turned. The Silver Baron was stripped of his posthumous titles. His assets were frozen. But the twist that the listeners will love is this. Beatrice didn't want the money. Keep the mansion, she told the council. Burn it for all I care. I just want the land on the upper ridge, and I want my name cleared. She got both, but she also got something she didn't expect. When she walked out of the town hall, the women of the town, the washerwomen, the bakers' wives, the ones who had been invisible like her, were waiting. They didn't cheer. They just nodded. It was a silent acknowledgement. The giantess had slain the ogre. Beatrice returned to the mountain, but the cabin was no longer enough. Beatrice had a vision. They called me a monster, she told Silas one night as they looked over the valley. They threw away girls who didn't fit. Too fat, too loud, too smart, too poor. I want to build a place for them. Using the lumber from the surrounding forests and the funds from selling the last of her mother's jewelry, which she had recovered from the mansion before leaving, they built Brown Hall. It wasn't a finishing school. It was a survival school. For 20 years, Beatrice Kincaid ran the toughest boarding house in Montana. Parents sent their difficult daughters to her. Girls who refused to marry, girls who wanted to read instead of sew, girls who were hefty or homely. Beatrice taught them mathematics and literature. Silas taught them how to shoot, how to track, and how to skin a buck. There is a famous story, verified by diaries from 1895, of a band of cattle rustlers who tried to raid the school, thinking it was full of defenseless women. They were met by 20 girls armed with Winchester rifles, led by a massive woman who wielded a wood-splitting maul. The rustlers didn't just run. They left their boots behind in their haste. Beatrice and Silas never had children of their own biological blood, but they had hundreds of daughters. They grew old on that mountain. Silas's beard turned white as the snow, and Beatrice moved slower, her joints aching from the cold winters, but they remained formidable. They say true love is gazing at each other. It's about looking outward together in the same direction. For Beatrice and Silas, that direction was always the horizon, looking for the next storm they could weather together. The end of the story is where the tears come. It was 1920. The world had changed. Cars were replacing horses. The Wild West was dying, paved over by civilization. Silas was 80 years old. His heart, which had survived wars and winters, was finally failing. He lay in the bed in the expanded cabin, the window open to let in the smell of pine. Beatrice sat beside him. She was an old woman now, still large, still imposing, a matriarch in every sense. She held his hand, the hand that had pulled her from the snow 30 years ago. "You know," Silas whispered, his voice barely a rasp, "I was wrong." "Wrong about what? Old man?" Beatrice smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I said you were the most beautiful thing on this mountain," he wheezed. "But you ain't." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "Oh?" "You're the mountain itself," Silas smiled, his eyes closing. "Solid. Eternal. You held me up, Bea. You carried me. And you kept me warm," she whispered. Silas Kincaid died with the sun on his face and his hand in hers. Beatrice lived another 5 years. She didn't fade away. She wrote her memoirs. She ensured the deed to the school was placed in a trust so it would never be sold by greedy men. When she finally passed, they didn't bury her in the town cemetery with the Browns. They buried her on the ridge, next to Silas. If you go to the Bitterroot Mountains today, you can still find the foundation stones of the old school, and there is a marker there, 2 simple stones. One says the Butcher, the other says the Behemoth. But someone, years later, perhaps one of the girls they saved, carved a new line across both stones, uniting them. Here lie the king and queen of the high country. They weighed nothing, for they carried each other. That is the incredible, true-to-life saga of Beatrice Brown and Silas Kincaid. It's a story that proves revenge isn't always about hurting those who hurt you. Sometimes, the best revenge is surviving, thriving, and becoming exactly who they said you couldn't be. Beatrice was cast out for taking up too much space, only to build a life so big that history couldn't ignore her. I want to know what you think. Was Beatrice right to let Reginald fall, or should she have tried harder to save him? And would you have the courage to run into a blizzard to escape a toxic life? Let me know in the comments below. If this story gave you chills or made you tear up, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their inner strength, and make sure you are subscribed with the bell notification on so you don't miss our next Wild West tale. Thanks for watching, and remember, you are never too much, and you are never alone.